The workplace has a particular way of revealing where understanding has not yet become embodied. You may know that your worth is not determined by another person's opinions and still feel your body tighten when a manager questions your work. You may understand that people operate from different histories and levels of awareness and still spend an entire drive home replaying what a coworker said at lunch. You may believe that you are responsible for your own inner state and then discover how quickly a deadline, an unfair decision, or an overlooked contribution can seem to take possession of it. None of this means the understanding was false. It means life has brought the understanding into contact with the places where it has not yet become stable. This is one reason ordinary work can become such an exact environment for growth. A workplace repeatedly places you near people you did not choose, under conditions you did not completely control, while asking you to cooperate with priorities that are not always your own. You cannot arrange every conversation around your preferred emotional state, and you cannot expect every person around you to understand what you understand. The friction is not automatically evidence that you are in the wrong place. Sometimes friction simply reveals the difference between an awareness that exists when nothing challenges it and an awareness capable of remaining present while something does. There is an important distinction here between alignment and comfort. Comfort tells you that the environment is cooperating with your preferences. Alignment tells you that your choices remain recognizable to you even when the environment does not. These can occur together, but they are not the same condition. If you require everyone around you to behave consciously before you can behave consciously, then your consciousness is still being governed by the room. The deeper movement is not learning how to become unaffected by the room, but learning how to remain in relationship with what affects you without surrendering your authorship to it. This changes the meaning of many ordinary workplace moments. The coworker who frustrates you does not need to become a spiritual lesson you secretly congratulate yourself for understanding better than they do. They are simply another human being whose habits, fears, ambitions, pressures, blind spots, and capacities intersect with yours for several hours each day. You may need to disagree with them, confront something they are doing, limit your exposure to them, document an interaction, or refuse a request. Awareness does not remove these possibilities. It changes the quality from which you enter them. You can say no without needing the other person to become wrong enough to justify your no. You can recognize that someone behaves destructively without reducing their entire humanity to the behavior you dislike. You can understand why a manager is under pressure and still refuse to absorb that pressure as though it belongs inside your nervous system. This is where compassion becomes more mature than accommodation. Compassion can understand another person's condition, while boundaries determine how much of that condition you are willing to participate in. Many people discover that awakening initially makes workplace dynamics more visible rather than less irritating. You begin noticing the subtle performances that previously seemed normal, laughing because everyone else is laughing, agreeing before you have considered whether you agree, making yourself smaller around authority, exaggerating confidence around competition, withholding appreciation because recognition feels scarce. You notice how often people speak differently when the manager enters the room, and perhaps how often you do too. What becomes uncomfortable is not merely the workplace culture, it is seeing the ways you learn to survive inside it. Awareness illuminates the system outside you and the version of that system you have carried within yourself. That inner version deserves attention because leaving a workplace does not necessarily remove it. A person can resign from an oppressive hierarchy while carrying their relationship with authority into the next organization. They can leave competitive coworkers while continuing to measure themselves against everyone they meet. They can escape a culture obsessed with productivity while remaining unable to rest without feeling guilty. The building changed, but the organizing principle traveled with it. External change can be necessary and wise, but external movement and internal liberation are different movements, and confusing them can cause a person to repeatedly change circumstances without discovering what keeps reappearing. This is also why staying should never automatically be interpreted as fear. There are seasons when remaining where you are is the most coherent decision available, even after you recognize that the environment is imperfect. You may have children depending on your income, debt that requires attention, health insurance tied to employment, a partner whose circumstances matter alongside your own, or simply a desire to build enough stability before making a significant transition. These considerations are not interruptions to consciousness. They are part of the actual life in which consciousness is being lived. There can be a subtle spiritual vanity in believing that practical constraints should no longer matter once someone becomes sufficiently awake. Rent still arrives, bodies still need food, transportation still costs money, and people who depend upon you experience the consequences of your decisions, whether those decisions were made from inspiration or impulse. Material responsibility is not necessarily attachment to the material world. Sometimes it is love expressed through reliability. The person who carefully prepares for a transition may be demonstrating considerably more freedom than someone who abandons every responsibility because remaining uncomfortable for 6 more months feels spiritually intolerable. At the same time, practicality can become a sophisticated language for fear. There is always another amount of money you could save, another credential you could acquire, another year you could wait, another reason the timing is not ideal. A person can call this responsibility long after responsibility has become avoidance. This is why no universal teaching can tell you whether to stay or leave. The more useful question is what is actually organizing the decision: clarity, fear, resentment, obligation, patience, exhaustion, preparation, self respect, fantasy, or some mixture you have not yet been willing to name. You may discover that the most aligned action is not dramatic enough to satisfy the part of you that wants transformation to look significant. Perhaps nothing changes on Monday, except that you stop checking email after a certain hour. Perhaps you no longer volunteer to rescue projects because being needed has quietly become part of your identity. Perhaps you begin asking questions instead of automatically agreeing, or stop participating in conversations that depend upon humiliating someone who is not present. These are small movements externally, but they can represent substantial reorganizations internally. A life changes not only through doors we walk out of, but through the behaviors we stop carrying through the doors we continue entering. This becomes especially visible around authority. Many adults encounter a manager as though they are encountering something much larger than another human being performing an organizational role. Approval from above can activate old patterns of pleasing, fear, rebellion, competition, or submission that existed long before the current job. Someone may call themselves cooperative when they are actually afraid to disagree, while someone else may call themselves independent when they are automatically resisting anyone who has authority over them. Awakening does not require rejecting hierarchy on principle. It invites you to notice what hierarchy activates inside you. A title gives someone certain responsibilities and certain forms of organizational authority. It does not give them ownership of your interior world. You can follow a reasonable instruction without becoming subordinate in your sense of self, just as you can challenge an unreasonable instruction without needing to turn the person giving it into an enemy. Cooperation is not surrender, and disagreement is not liberation simply because it feels defiant. The question beneath both is whether you remain capable of choosing your response rather than merely reenacting your conditioning. The same examination applies to ambition. Wanting advancement is not automatically evidence that ego has captured you, any more than rejecting advancement proves that you have transcended ego. You can want greater responsibility because you enjoy developing your capacities, because you want more resources for your family, because you believe you can influence an organization constructively, or because the work genuinely interests you. You can also want the promotion because you need the title to reassure you that your life matters. The outer movement may look identical while the inner relationship is entirely different. And even here, awareness should not become another instrument for judging yourself. Human motives are rarely pure enough to fit neatly into spiritual categories. You may want the promotion because the work interests you and because recognition feels good. You may want to leave because the environment is genuinely unhealthy and because part of you imagines another workplace will never frustrate you. Maturity is not the elimination of mixed motives. It is becoming capable of seeing them without arranging them into a flattering story. This is where work begins to expose something larger than work. The office, warehouse, hospital, classroom, construction site, restaurant, studio, store, vehicle, or home desk becomes one of the places where you discover how much of your identity has been organized through usefulness. If you are productive, you feel valuable. If you fall behind, something deeper than concern about the task begins to ache. If someone praises your contribution, your sense of self expands. If your effort goes unnoticed, you contract. The problem is not that recognition feels good or criticism feels unpleasant. The question is whether these experiences are information moving through you or authorities defining you. There is enormous freedom in allowing work to matter without requiring it to explain who you are. You can care about doing something well without turning every result into a referendum on your worth. You can experience disappointment when a project fails without converting failure into identity. You can enjoy being recognized without becoming dependent upon recognition. And you can seek better compensation without pretending money is beneath you. Detachment, in this sense, does not mean caring less. It means allowing care to become cleaner because your entire existence is no longer being negotiated through outcome. Once this begins, another possibility appears. You may realize that the workplace you thought was preventing your alignment has actually been showing you precisely where your alignment still depends upon conditions. This does not make exploitation sacred, dysfunction necessary, or suffering something you should tolerate for growth. It simply means that before you decide what the environment must become, you can become interested in what your reactions inside that environment are revealing. And when that interest becomes steady enough, the question of whether to stay, change the way you participate, prepare to leave, or walk away altogether begins to arise from a very different place. From that different place, leaving no longer has to function as an accusation against which you are leaving. You may eventually know that a workplace no longer fits without needing to prove that everyone there is unconscious, corrupt, or beneath you. You may recognize that you have learned what you can learn, contributed what you can contribute, and reached the edge of what that environment can reasonably hold. When departure comes from this kind of clarity, there is often less theater around it because the decision does not require an enemy. You simply understand that continuing would ask you to become smaller, less honest, or less alive than you are willing to become. But clarity is not always quiet at first. Sometimes it arrives through anger because anger is the first emotion strong enough to interrupt years of accommodation. Someone who has tolerated disrespect may need to feel the full force of their refusal before they can express that refusal calmly. Someone who has built an identity around being dependable may initially experience boundaries as guilt, selfishness, or even betrayal. The emergence of discomfort does not necessarily mean the boundary is wrong. Sometimes discomfort is what an old pattern feels like when it is no longer being obeyed. This matters because people often use emotional peace as the measurement of alignment. They assume that if a decision produces anxiety, sadness, guilt, or uncertainty, it must be spiritually incorrect. Yet meaningful choices frequently disturb arrangements that once provided psychological safety, even when those arrangements were constricting. You can know that you need to speak honestly and still fear the conversation. Know that you need to reduce your workload and still feel guilty when someone is disappointed. Know that a job is ending and still grieve the people and routines you will leave behind. Alignment does not anesthetize consequence. The same principle applies when you remain. Staying consciously is different from remaining because you have convinced yourself that nothing can change. A conscious stay has movement inside it. You are observing, adjusting, establishing limits, building resources, developing skills, having conversations, or simply giving yourself enough time to understand what is actually happening. Resignation, by contrast, gradually turns the workplace into a permanent explanation for why you cannot live differently. One says, "This is where I am right now." The other quietly becomes, "This is what my life is." That difference can be difficult to see from outside. Two people may sit at neighboring desks in the same organization, doing similar work under the same manager, while inhabiting completely different relationships with the experience. One spends every evening imagining escape but takes no meaningful action, while the other has deliberately chosen to remain for another year while preparing for a transition. One feels trapped because every option has been mentally dismissed before being explored. The other recognizes genuine limitations without turning those limitations into identity. Circumstances matter, but so does the relationship consciousness forms with circumstance. This is where personal authority becomes more subtle than simply doing what you want. Authority includes the capacity to make choices you do not enjoy because they serve something you value. You may prefer not to work overtime, yet occasionally choose to because a commitment genuinely matters to you. You may dislike a particular assignment while recognizing that completing it is part of an agreement you willingly maintain. Freedom is not the absence of obligation. Freedom becomes visible in whether you can distinguish chosen responsibility from unconscious submission. Without that distinction, spiritual language can easily become a way of avoiding ordinary adulthood. Every inconvenience becomes misalignment. Every difficult person becomes low frequency. Every expectation becomes control. And every compromise becomes a betrayal of authenticity. But a life containing no inconvenience, disagreement, obligation, compromise, or frustration is not necessarily a liberated life. It may simply be a life arranged to prevent contact with anything that challenges the self. Consciousness is not demonstrated by how successfully you eliminate friction. It is revealed partly by what happens within you when friction cannot or should not be eliminated. This does not mean enduring everything. There are workplaces where the conditions themselves require action. Harassment, exploitation, discrimination, unsafe practices, chronic humiliation, coercion, or demands that repeatedly violate reasonable limits. No amount of inner work turns abuse into healthy employment, and no teaching about awareness should be used to persuade someone to spiritually reinterpret what needs to be confronted. Sometimes the clearest expression of alignment is documentation, escalation, outside support, legal protection, refusal, or departure. Consciousness should increase your ability to recognize reality, not make you easier to mistreat. Yet, even when leaving is necessary, there is still value in understanding what the experience has done inside you. A harmful environment can train vigilance into the body until every new manager feels dangerous before they have done anything dangerous. Years of being undervalued can make ordinary feedback sound like rejection, while years of instability can make a healthy workplace feel suspicious, simply because calm has become unfamiliar. Leaving removes you from the conditions, but your system may continue anticipating them. Recovery sometimes means discovering that the door you walked through externally still needs to be walked through internally. This is one reason awareness cannot remain merely philosophical. The body often tells the truth about your relationship with work before your thoughts are willing to admit it. Notice what happens on Sunday evening when a particular name appears on your phone, when you hear the notification sound from your work email, when someone asks for a quick conversation, or when you finally close the laptop. Not every contraction means you should quit, but repeated reactions contain information. Conscious participation includes listening to that information without immediately turning every sensation into either a command or something to suppress. You may find that what exhausts you is not always the amount of work you perform. Sometimes exhaustion comes from the identity you perform while doing it, constantly monitoring whether people approve of you, hiding disagreement, anticipating moods, proving competence, rescuing coworkers, pretending enthusiasm, and translating every mistake into a threat can consume more energy than the actual task. A person can work 8 hours and spend 12 hours psychologically maintaining the person they believe the workplace requires them to be. When that performance begins to loosen, the same job can sometimes feel surprisingly different. This is not because the organization has transformed, it is because some of the invisible labor has stopped. You no longer spend 20 minutes composing a harmless email because you are trying to control every possible interpretation. You allow someone to be mildly disappointed without immediately reorganizing your day to repair their feeling. You make a mistake, correct it, learn what needs learning, and resist constructing an identity crisis around it. These changes can appear ordinary, but they mark the return of energy that had been continuously invested in managing other people's perceptions. And when that energy returns, you may discover that your relationship with competence changes as well. You can become excellent at your work without using excellence as protection against feeling inadequate. You can care about details without believing every imperfection exposes something shameful about you. You can receive criticism without either collapsing beneath it or dismissing the person offering it. Competence becomes something you practice rather than something you must constantly prove. And that difference creates room for learning where defensiveness once lived. It also changes how you encounter coworkers whose relationship with work is different from yours. Someone may care deeply about promotion while you do not, or may want stability where you want experimentation, or may simply come to work for a paycheck and have no desire to make employment part of a larger inner journey. Their orientation does not need to resemble yours in order to possess dignity. Awareness that produces contempt has not yet understood very much about awareness. If seeing more causes you to respect fewer people, then what you are calling expansion may still contain a hierarchy you have not examined. The person beside you may never use the language you use and may still demonstrate qualities you are trying to embody. They may show patience with a difficult customer, quietly protect a younger employee, keep a promise when breaking it would be convenient, admit a mistake without defensiveness, or bring humor into a room that has become too serious. Human depth does not always announce itself through spiritual vocabulary. Sometimes the person you have categorized as less aware is already living a principle you have only learned to describe. This recognition changes the workplace from a landscape of awakened and unawakened people into something more honest. Everyone is carrying a mixture of awareness and conditioning, generosity and fear, maturity and unfinished history, including you. The manager you resent may be remarkably conscious in one area of life and deeply defended in another. The coworker who irritates you may be touching precisely the pattern you can see clearly in them because you have not yet learned to recognize its quieter form in yourself. The point is not to turn every conflict into a mirror, but to stop assuming that your interpretation automatically places you outside the dynamics you are observing. Then work becomes less about protecting a spiritual identity and more about practicing a human one. You do not have to announce your awareness, convince coworkers of your worldview, or transform meetings into opportunities to demonstrate how differently you see things. Your understanding becomes visible through how you listen when someone is difficult, how you use authority when it is given to you, how you behave when nobody is praising you, and whether success makes you less capable of seeing the people whose labor helped create it. Embodiment is often quiet enough that the people around you may never know what philosophy, practice, or inner transformation informed it. And this quietness begins to expose another layer of the question. If awakening does not require abandoning ordinary work, and if ordinary work can become one of the places where awareness is tested and embodied, then the distinction between a spiritual life and the rest of life begins to weaken. The hours spent earning money are no longer waiting rooms between the moments that supposedly matter. The conversation with the difficult manager, the decision not to carry resentment home, the boundary held without cruelty, and the task completed with care even when no one notices. All of these become part of the same life. And once work is allowed to belong to that life rather than stand outside it, a deeper question begins to emerge about what we have been calling purpose in the first place. Purpose becomes easier to understand when it is no longer required to arrive disguised as a profession. Many people have been taught, spiritually and culturally, To search for the one form of work that will perfectly express who they are, as though finding the correct occupation will finally resolve the tension between earning a living and being alive. This can turn employment into an impossible demand. The job must provide income, meaning, identity, community, creativity, growth, freedom, recognition, and a sense of contribution all at once. When it fails to provide one of these, the person begins wondering whether they have wandered away from their path. But perhaps your work was never meant to contain the entirety of your purpose. There are people whose deepest contribution and occupation happen to overlap, and there is nothing wrong with that. There are also people whose employment provides stability while the most meaningful expressions of their lives occur through parenting, friendship, art, community, service, study, caregiving, invention, or the quiet ways they affect the people around them. Neither arrangement is inherently more evolved. Purpose is diminished when it becomes another title you must discover and display. A life can be deeply purposeful even when the line on the employment form does not explain why that person is here. This releases work from a burden it was never designed to carry. Your job can matter without becoming sacred, and it can be ordinary without becoming meaningless. You can perform work that would never appear on a vision board and still bring intelligence, dignity, humor, fairness, and care into the environment where it occurs. You can also admit that you are doing something primarily because it pays you, without turning that honesty into shame. Sometimes work is vocation, sometimes it is service, sometimes it is apprenticeship, sometimes it is temporary infrastructure, and sometimes it is simply the agreement through which you currently exchange your time and ability for resources. Once this is understood, another kind of honesty becomes possible. You no longer have to manufacture spiritual significance around work you do not particularly love. You do not need to claim that every spreadsheet, shift, delivery, meeting, or customer interaction is your divine calling in order to approach it consciously. Meaning does not require exaggeration. The ordinary becomes worthy of attention, not because every task contains a hidden cosmic message, but because you are actually there while you are doing it. And being there changes more than it first appears to change. It means noticing when impatience enters your voice because you have decided another person is wasting your time. It means noticing when exhaustion makes you less generous, when insecurity makes you territorial, when praise makes you perform, and when disappointment tempts you to withdraw effort as punishment. These moments are rarely dramatic enough to be included in stories about awakening. Yet this is where an inner understanding begins becoming a way of living rather than a collection of ideas you agree with. The workplace is especially revealing because repetition removes the excitement from practice. It is one thing to choose patience during an important conversation when you know the moment matters. It is another to practice patience with the same irritating behavior on an ordinary Tuesday after sleeping badly. It is one thing to speak about compassion when you feel spacious. It is another to remain humane when someone receives the opportunity you wanted. Repetition shows you what remains when inspiration is absent, and what remains is often a more accurate measure of embodiment than what you can access during your clearest moments. This is why boredom deserves more attention than it usually receives. Boredom can expose the belief that life is meaningful only when something interesting is happening to you. A repetitive job can make consciousness feel trapped because the mind keeps demanding novelty as evidence that life is moving. Yet there is a difference between recognizing that you have outgrown work and being unable to inhabit anything that does not continuously stimulate you. If you cannot remain present during the ordinary, you may spend your life pursuing increasingly dramatic circumstances while calling the pursuit expansion. There is something powerful about learning to inhabit an ordinary day without requiring the day to prove that you are on the right path. You answer what needs answering, complete what needs completing, take your break, speak with the person beside you, notice the afternoon light through a window, return home, and the universe does not need to send you a sign about any of it. The absence of intensity does not mean the absence of life. Sometimes the most profound evidence of inner stability is that nothing extraordinary has to happen for you to remain connected to yourself. This steadiness also changes your relationship with time. When you believe your real life exists somewhere beyond the current job, months and years can become something you endure while waiting for the future to begin. You work today for the imagined version of yourself who will eventually be free, aligned, independent, recognized, or finally doing what matters. Preparation for change can be wise, but postponing your existence until change arrives is different. Even a transitional season is still part of your life, and you do not receive those hours back simply because you intended them to lead somewhere else. So prepare for what comes next without abandoning where you are. Learn the skill, save the money, make the application, build the business, take the course, have the conversation, investigate the possibility, and let these actions gradually create another option. But while you are preparing, remain available to the life occurring now. The coworker speaking to you today is not a background character in the future you are building. The person you become during the transition will eventually be the person who arrives wherever you are trying to go. This becomes especially important when the future finally opens. If you have practiced believing that another circumstance will give you permission to become yourself, the new circumstance may initially feel liberating and then slowly acquire the same psychological weight as the old one. The business you dreamed of can become another place where worth is measured through productivity. The creative career can become another source of comparison. The flexible schedule, another reason to work constantly. The mission driven organization, another hierarchy whose approval you seek. Freedom cannot be secured entirely through architecture because the self that enters the new architecture participates in creating the experience of it. This does not reduce the importance of choosing environments carefully. Circumstances shape us, and some environments make healthy participation far more possible than others. Better leadership matters, fair compensation matters, psychological safety matters, meaningful work matters, and leaving conditions that repeatedly diminish you can transform a life. But inner freedom and external conditions are partners rather than substitutes. You improve what can be improved outside while becoming more conscious of what you are carrying inside. Eventually, this produces a more grounded relationship with the word alignment itself. Alignment stops meaning that everything around you reflects your preferences and begins meaning that your participation increasingly reflects your values. You become less concerned with whether the organization is perfectly aligned with you and more attentive to where your participation asks you to violate what you genuinely know. Some compromises are simply the texture of cooperating with other people. Others slowly require you to abandon yourself. Discernment develops by learning the difference rather than placing every discomfort into the same category. You may discover that one compromise asks for flexibility, while another asks for dishonesty. One deadline requires temporary effort, while another belongs to a culture that continuously consumes people's lives. One disagreement invites maturity, while another reveals a pattern of disrespect that conversation has not changed. These distinctions cannot be made by slogans because reality is more specific than slogans. Awareness becomes useful precisely when it allows you to perceive those specifics without immediately forcing them into a story about staying, leaving, loyalty, failure, courage, or awakening. And perhaps this is why there can never be a universal answer to whether an awakened person should remain in conventional employment. For one person, leaving may be the first honest decision they have made in years. For another, staying may be the first time they have stopped using escape as their response to discomfort. For someone else, the movement may be neither staying nor leaving yet, but beginning to participate differently while enough clarity develops to know what comes next. The outer action cannot tell you everything about the consciousness from which it arose. What can be observed is the quality you are bringing into the choice. Are you able to see the environment without idealizing or demonizing it? Can you acknowledge your material needs without being ashamed of them? And acknowledge your deeper needs without dismissing them as impractical? Can you recognize what belongs to the workplace, what belongs to your own conditioning, and where the two have become entangled? The clearer these distinctions become, the less you need a dramatic narrative to authorize whatever you eventually choose. Then even the question of whether your job is aligned begins to soften. Perhaps the more revealing question is whether you are learning to live in alignment while you have a job, while you search for one, while you leave one, while you build something new, and while circumstances refuse to organize themselves around your preferred timeline. A life cannot wait for perfect conditions before becoming conscious. If awareness is real, It must eventually become capable of entering calendars, budgets, meetings, disagreements, commutes, responsibilities, ambitions, disappointments, and ordinary afternoons without requiring those things to become something else first. You may still change careers. You may negotiate different conditions, reduce your hours, become self employed, return to school, remain where you are for 20 years, or discover a direction you cannot currently imagine. None of these outcomes prove that you have understood the teaching, because the teaching was never about producing a particular arrangement. It was about becoming less willing to disappear inside whatever arrangement you inhabit. The world does not need you to escape every imperfect system before you can bring something different into it. And perhaps this is where work returns you to the larger question underneath so much awakening. Not how do I construct a life in which nothing contradicts me, but how fully can I remain myself while meeting a world that was never designed around me? That question follows you beyond employment because every relationship, family, community, institution, and society eventually asks some version of it. Work is simply one of the places where the answer becomes visible every day. And once you begin seeing alignment this way, the ordinary structures of your life start revealing dimensions of practice that were there long before you knew to look for them.
If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Vaharat library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.